So good morning again. Thank you, Barb, for the introduction. I'm Ann Goodchild. I'm director of the SCTL Center. And as Barb mentioned, I've been leading research on freight, transportation, and logistics topics at the University of Washington for about 10 years. And I've interacted with many of you on those efforts. That's how we've been building a community and how we've been sharing and learning from each other over the last decade. So I thoroughly enjoy that, and it's always nice to see people back at these kinds of events. I was going to introduce Mark Hallenbeck, but he left. And Mark, you may have seen his face in the newspaper or on TV. He tends to be one of the UW transportation experts that's willing to always give a quote for a story. But he directs the Washington State Transportation Center, which has been a great partner of ours. It's also known as TREC. And we've been collaborating with them, and they've provided a lot of support for us in terms of helping with the infrastructure of building a center. Also, Ann Moudon is here, who directs the Urban Form Lab. And again, they've been a great collaborator so far, and we look forward to continuing to work with them. So thanks for the help you've given us so far, Ann. When I first moved to Seattle, like 11 years ago, Ann was one of the kind souls who sort of gave us a little bit of advice and gave me a recommendation for a cleaning company that still cleans my house. So they've been excellent. They were there yesterday.
How about the doll's house?
The dollhouse, no, that went a while ago. But you gave me a comforter, which we still use. So as center director, I will lead our first collaborative research project that will address the urban goods system and specifically the final 50 feet. And that's a collaboration with the Seattle Department of Transportation, as well as a few other organizations who I'll speak to a little bit further. This part of the supply chain is particularly interesting, I think, and challenging because it requires that carriers like the United States Postal Service or UPS or Federal Express actually use shared public infrastructure. So roadways, sidewalks, curbs, you heard Scott mention, to do their business and to do their work and to deliver to retailers or restaurants or cafes. And that's an infrastructure they don't control. It's an infrastructure that has other objectives than just moving goods. It's a place, Scott mentioned placemaking. It's a place where people spend time. It's a place where pedestrians move around. And we want to provide for all of those needs. And so this problem, the final 50 feet, one of the challenges is that we have to use this infrastructure, carriers have to use this infrastructure to deliver on time and to deliver accurately and appropriately, but they have to do so in this sort of muddy mix of other objectives and other goals. It's unlike most of the rest of their supply chain, right, which is privately held infrastructure, privately held equipment that they do have control over. We will conduct this research by partnering with carriers and retailers and public agencies, the entities you've already heard are involved in this problem, as well as technology firms in what we're calling the Urban Freight Lab. So we have founding members of that Freight Lab here this morning, Nordstrom and Costco, as well as the Seattle Department of Transportation and the United Parcel Service. So that will be a small group which reflects the most essential components of this system and works together very closely on trying solutions, identifying solutions, and developing innovation. So you'll notice down here this photo is credit to Anna Bjorkberg. Anna is taking many pictures today. She's an amazing photographer, so just take note of her beautiful pictures. Thank you, Anna. So urban transportation infrastructure, such as roads and sidewalks, are not only used for goods delivery. And you can see in this picture here, there's a delivery, a driver, trying to make a delivery, and he's sharing that infrastructure with pedestrians, with signage. He's using that sidewalk as temporary storage. There are cyclists who have the right to use this right-of-way. In other places, there are chairs and tables also sharing this infrastructure. And these are all valid and important and synergistic uses of the infrastructure. As Scott mentioned, we wouldn't need to deliver food if there wasn't a sidewalk cafe. So it's important that these uses can exist in concert and that we can provide for efficient, safe delivery of goods, as well as meet the needs of other users of the infrastructure or other dwellers of the city and develop a vibrant, comfortable place for people to spend time. You've probably heard the term, the last mile. This chart shows it's an average. So as an academic engineer, I need to explain a little bit about the data. It is an average from an open source software tool. So it reflects many different delivery sort of instances, different companies using this system. So it's not meant to suggest that of all, if we look at every supply chain, that the last mile is 53%. But it's meant to suggest why the last mile is sort of considered inefficient. So it's only a mile, but it reflects typically 25 to 50% of the cost of transportation in a supply chain. And so since supply chain managers have been aware of this problem, since we've had better sensors, since we've had data and analytics, there's been an emphasis in that sphere, in the supply chain management world, on addressing and reducing and at least containing costs in this last leg. It's seen as a disproportionate cost, disproportionate because although it's not very far, it's a large percentage of cost. And the approaches that have been used in the supply chain space, so we talk about supply chains because these are the users of the system that are delivering goods. This man is part of a supply chain, right, that's trying to deliver a beverage to presumably a retail establishment nearby. He's part of a supply chain. The person planning for this person's job is a transportation manager, a supply chain manager. And so the approaches that have been taken to look at this problem to date have really been sort of supply chain management approaches. That's the entity that's typically managing and making decisions. And so they've undertaken important and effective strategies around optimizing routing and schedule. We've looked at a lot of inventory management that Apurva teaches in our SCTL program, omni-channel or strategies where we're trying to integrate inventory and reduce inventory in that system. And it's challenging in this last mile component. And while those have been very important and continue to be important sources of cost reduction and innovation, the one thing that's been missing from these solutions that have been considered so far is the fundamental physical challenges of the final 50 feet. So we want to talk, we've called this piece of work the final 50 feet to differentiate it from the last mile. Because the last mile tends to be a sort of supply chain view, and it's very long. And what really matters at the end of the day is this final 50 feet, where a vehicle has to find a place to stop. A driver, typically, it's the same person, has to unload goods from that vehicle and get them to the receiver. And that final 50 feet is challenging and we think very interesting. This guy has to decide, where he can park, when he can park there, how to unload, how to navigate the curb and the sidewalk, and how to bring those goods to the receiver, because he doesn't get paid until those goods get to the receiver. The final 50 feet has received less attention because addressing these costs means working outside of the supply chain that you control. The supply chain that you control, distribution centers, routing, scheduling, truck allocation, doesn't include navigating the curb. And for carriers and shippers, that means interacting with public agencies, working with building managers, and they're just two communities that to date don't typically spend a lot of time together, have different cultures, and we plan to change that in the Urban Freight Lab. We plan to bring together these members in a small working group to have at the table shippers, carriers, local agencies, and tech firms to make sure we understand the problem, brainstorm solutions, actually physically test those solutions together, and of course we're going to do some simulation and some performance measurement as well. So for the public sector, urban goods delivery activities can often present challenges to other infrastructure users. So you can see here there's a truck. So this is one of my other students, took this picture last year, Pramod Chandra. The truck is, he's presumably making a delivery, but the place he's found convenient to park is in the middle of the bike lane. And so for the cyclist, and we did this in the winter, so it's actually not the middle of the night. It's probably 9:30 in the morning. But the cyclist has to either ride into parked cars or ride up on the sidewalk, because we haven't provided this delivery vehicle with a solution that otherwise is desirable. And 99% of them are men. So he's, just trying to do his work and deliver goods. But this activity has presented challenges for other very valid users of the infrastructure. Here, this is the summertime, so it may be 7 in the morning. This driver and his truck are momentarily, essentially closing this roadway, obstructing signage, and reducing, when he's not walking over there, sort of reducing this road to a one-way street. So when we don't provide reasonable, safe access, these are the solutions that drivers need to come up with. And to accommodate one mode, a city may decide to dedicate curb space to one use. Scott talked a lot about curb space and sort of the competition for curb space. And here, the introduction of this bike lane, intended to protect cyclists, because it's dangerous to have bikes and at least 3,000 pounds of metal, moving metal nearby, has meant that the curb space is now not available for loading and unloading activities. So the challenge of providing sufficient infrastructure to accommodate effective, cost-effective, safe urban goods delivery is present and pressing. At the same time, online shopping and the demand for delivery services is growing and continues to grow. So on the left, this is from the Wall Street Journal. They can produce nice visuals. On the left there, that bar graph shows that in 2016, of people who shop online, which is most people, 2016 was the first year that they actually spent more money online than in traditional retail establishments. So online shopping has happened. It is not going away. And as you can see on the right here, young people are typically the most likely to be online shoppers. So we should expect to continue to see the percentage of online shopping continue to grow. And this changes, as Scott mentioned, this dramatically changes transportation and the demand for transport and the demand for delivery services. I still have to act upon this, but it's a great time to get into the cardboard business. So at the same time that we see it growing online shopping, consumer expectations are increasing and continue to increase. I don't really buy much that can't be delivered the next day anymore. And there was a time when I waited 4 or 5 days to get something that was bought online. Consumers expect free or discounted shipping. Consumers expect simple and generous return policies or exchange policies. Consumers expect to be able to track packages online in real time. And last year, one of my classes did a project with Seattle Public Schools and looked at their bus service. And I have 2 kids who ride the Seattle Public Schools bus to school every day. And one of the things that I saw earlier this year in that community was disbelief that we couldn't track the children on the bus. So one of the parents was really angry, that he couldn't track where the bus was and whether or not his kid was on the bus online in real time. And, he's one person, but it really, when we have these expectations, they don't go away, they don't decrease, and they will continue to filter into the rest of our expectations about transportation. So service expectations, you can call them crazy, but they're there, they now exist, and they will not be going sort of backwards. Many retailers, very sophisticated, successful retailers, are really struggling to define their delivery services, to define pricing so that it's profitable to engage in this sector, and feel they must in order to exist in the marketplace. And so one of the reasons our retailers want to come to this problem is it's a fundamental economic challenge for them, and helping with urban delivery will support that primary mission of our retailers. So at the same time, and Scott mentioned this a little bit as well, cities, we see urbanization, and we see cities, and Seattle in particular, seeing increased urbanization and population growth. In 2015, for the third year in a row, Seattle was amongst the top 5 big cities for population growth, according to the Census Bureau. TomTom's Traffic 2016 Index puts Seattle as the 4th worst city in the nation for congestion, and actually the 2nd worst city in the country for 2016, which isn't really over yet, so I'm guessing it's a projection. The 2nd worst city in terms of evening commutes. So it's not just your imagination. Traffic is getting worse, and so there's intense competition for roadway space and for use of that capacity. So we have this high cost component of the supply chain, the last mile or the last 50 feet, and supply chain's really struggling to contain the cost of that supply chain activity. We have dramatic changes in consumer behavior and supply chains which need to rethink their fundamental logistics to address that. And then we have intense and growing competition for public infrastructure, transportation facilities. And cities want to support a thriving, they want to support quality of life, they want to support thriving economies. Supply chains want to operate efficiently, cost effectively, they want to meet customer expectations. And it's this nexus of problems that is played out in the final 50 feet. It's this nexus of problems that we will undertake with our partners in the Urban Freight Lab. And we are excited to get started. So the final 50 feet, you've heard Scott talk about the curb, and the final 50 feet often starts with the curb. Right? It's a loading bay in some cases, but often it's the curb, and it's preferably the curb, typically. So how do we currently manage the curb? Our technology currently is to use different colored paint. To take some yellow paint and to paint it on the sidewalk, and to have that indicate use, right? You know what a red curb means, you know what a yellow curb means. And in many cases, that is a permanent reservation, okay? In some places, there's some time dependence of that, but in many cases, it's a simple approach. It's worked for us for hundreds of years, and that's the technology we use for curb space management. And as Scott mentioned, typically there's not a lot of thought. Well, there aren't that many applications where we have time-dependent use of that facility. It's a little harder. The paint can't change color different times of the day. So we can put up signs and we can read those signs, but it's a little bit harder to have time-dependent solutions. But there are many technologies, right, that we can use to manage this curve differently. We can price differently. We can have time-dependent strategies. We can automatically detect vehicles. We can automatically charge them. And so it's important to us to bring technology firms into these sets of solutions. Information and access to information and electronic interactions will be a large part of how we help this system work better for everybody. And so we've engaged tech companies. You're going to hear from one of our alumni who works in a tech firm that's addressing some of the transportation challenges. And we want to see these approaches be applied to curb space management, but also the goods delivery system in general. There's a lot of activity in the space of tech companies trying to address transportation challenges. So other cities have done things like paid incentives to receivers for taking off hours deliveries, allowed trucks to use the sidewalk at certain times of the day. So if you have a very big sidewalk, you can actually use that sidewalk for pedestrians when they're there and for trucks at other times of the day. Carriers and shippers have worked together independently to consolidate deliveries, reduce total trips when there's an example where they sort of realize they're serving the same destinations and there was benefit for them independently, business, financial incentives for them to collaborate. So we will explore existing and new solutions with our lab members, the ones that they identify as attractive and feasible options. So the SCTL Center fills a need in addressing the challenges of urban freight by bringing together communities who can, of course, speak to each other, but we will provide the place and the opportunity and the framework to do so. That is our role, eliciting solutions, eliciting understanding, knowledge sharing, problem evaluation, and making recommendations for improvements. That should all be things that have benefit to each of our stakeholders. Our first task is to convene the Urban Freight Lab. We want to ensure we specify the problem as they see it, not as we do. We'll be studying a variety of building types, a variety of delivery types. Packages are of different sizes. They take up different percentages of the truck, depending on truck size. And we will be measuring and field testing, as well as simulating some of those possible solutions. These solutions may include modifications on behalf of carriers or shippers, on behalf of public agencies. They may be operational improvements. We will look for what we think is the biggest bang for the buck. So before closing, I'd like to thank again my graduate students who really do a huge amount of this work, and that's fun for me to get up and stand, but they've been reading papers and they've been generating ideas and they've been discussing solutions with Barb and Ed and Ann and I. And so they really deserve a lot of credit and a lot of respect for that. In particular, these three in the back corner here have been thinking about urban freight. Jose Mercado Leon, Gabriela Valderrama, and Paulina Botrina, who are instrumental in this project. And it's a joy to work with you. And young people are so fun and energetic and idealistic, and it's really a privilege. So thanks for your time and attention. I think I can take a few questions. One question, the best question in the room. I will take it. I'm a paid teacher, so if you ever have questions, I will answer them for you. So I'll take one today, but please don't hesitate to call me up or send me an email, and we can talk all you want. Yeah, Lauren.
I'm not sure it's the best question, but
Yeah.
I'm Lauren with Convoy. And do you see the growth of Amazon, and maybe other people came up with the same system, but came up with a locker system. And it seems like a really great way to consolidate all those boxes people are ordering into one truck and deliver it maybe late at night to one place. Do you see that really growing in cities and maybe office buildings having lockers on the floor of it or something to help alleviate some of this congestion?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the locker, right, Amazon Locker, which is an example, it's a good solution in some cases for both parties, because Amazon, or whoever's ever doing delivery for them, can take multiple packages to one place and really cut out a part of your last mile cost problem. And then for some recipients, if they have concern about safety of a package being left on their door, or they can't be present and they need someone to sign for it, it can be sort of a win-win solution, and it reduces, depends on the situation. It can reduce total transportation, but if everybody's driving to that intermediate place to pick up their package, is actually more transportation. And we see that solution, right, in modern neighborhoods where the some modern neighborhoods where the post doesn't come to your house individually, they go to a central location because that's cheaper. In Europe, they use this example a lot more, and actually sort of convenience stores will serve as a receiver of goods, and I've seen like the UPS store does some of that. So yeah, it can be a good model, it can be a cost-effective model for the carrier. I don't think it will replace, it's not the model that works for everybody, and you know, personally, when I buy groceries online, they have to come to my house. I don't want to make another trip to go get them. So I think it serves a place. I think one challenge, this dystopian future that, I forget who mentioned it, maybe it was Scott, we don't really want, well, it's more transport to have many companies doing this same work. So, you know, is it, as a city, is it a great solution? I don't know, you know, to what, they don't control these things. But certainly it's one of the models, and it's I think an important model, particularly in some cases where it may provide benefit. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.